To our reading of the Septuagint. This is the first video in this section, and I'm going to go through the book of Tobit from the Greek translation of the Old Testament and other works. The book of Tobit is included in the Catholic and Orthodox canon, but it's regarded as apocryphal by Jews and Protestants. I'm recording this because it's a work that doesn't get read particularly often, and it's rather, I think, a rather sweet story and a rather interesting one, and a nice introduction to looking at some of the Greek of the Septuagint. The earliest texts of the book of Tobit were thought by some, until recently, to have been written in Greek, but it appears that it is, of course, a translation from some original work which may have been either probably in Aramaic. There are three main Greek manuscripts, the best being the Sinaiticus, which is the one we're going to read from. Remains of Aramaic and Hebrew versions have been found. That was in 1955, and it appears the work was probably written in Aramaic originally, somewhere between 250 and 175 BC, so just pre-Maccabean. And the place of composition may have been Egypt. The work itself is probably best described as a tapestry rather than a narrative, and it contains elements of earlier folkloric tales such as the Grateful Dead, the monster in the bridal chamber, the story of Ahikar. It's strongly affected by Jewish nationalism, but in itself it's quite a sweet story of Tobit and his son Tobias. The story is set shortly after the deportation of the northern tribes of Israel to Nineveh under Shalmaneser V. There are a number of historical and geographical anomalies that we'll see in the text. Although it's written with strongly Jewish in nature, the work contains material borrowed from non-Jewish sources, including late Persian. Main themes of the book are first and foremost the strict observance of the law, which includes almsgiving, the keeping of feasts, burying the dead, tithes, support of widows and orphans, moral purity, ritual observance, refraining from Gentile food, purification after contact with a corpse, washing before eating, and marrying within the kin. It also has sense of piety, honouring God, recognition of divine mercies, and frequent prayer. The Greek, as you'll see, is fairly easy. It's peppered with Hebraisms and non-Greek expressions, and there are a number of late and rare words and grammatical forms that we'll see. Now, chapter 1 is fairly pedestrian, and I'm not going to go through the Greek of that. I'm going to read out the translation from the New English Bible of chapter 1. If you're only interested in the Greek and not necessarily the full story, you might just skip the next bit and go straight to when we start reading the actual Greek of the Septuagint in chapter 2, but chapter 1 is important to put some sort of context to things. So he begins in chapter 1. This is the story of Tobit, the son of Tobiel, son of Hananiel, son of Aduel, son of Gabael, son of Raphael, son of Raguel, of the family of Asiel, of the tribe of Naphtali. He was taken prisoner in the time of Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, from Thisbe, which is south of Kadesh Naphtali in Upper Galilee, above Hazor, behind the road to the west, north of Peor. Well, in fact, there's a problem there already. It was in fact Sargon II, the brother of Shalmaneser IV, who completed Samaria's siege and exile. We now have a change of subject. Now Tobit introduces himself as the main speaker. He says, "I, Tobit, made truth and righteousness my lifelong guide. I did many acts of charity for my kinsmen, those of my nation who had gone into captivity with me at Nineveh in Syria. Nineveh, of course, became capital of Syria under Sennacherib, 705 to 681, and fell to the Medes in 612. So just to see where these places are as we read on, here's a little map here showing where he is and where he's going to. So he's coming from Naphtali over here in the Holy Land, and he's going to go up to Nineveh up here. So when I was young in my own country, Israel, the whole tribe of Naphtali, my ancestor, broke away from the dynasty of David and from Jerusalem, the city chosen out of all the tribes of Israel as the one place of sacrifice. It was there that God's dwelling place, the temple, had been consecrated, built to last for all generations, which of course it didn't. All my kinsmen, the whole house of Naphtali, my ancestor, sacrificed on the mountains of Galilee, to the calf which Jeroboam, king of Israel, made in Dan at the festivals. Well, this of course refers to the apostasy of Jeroboam, which is recorded in 1 Kings 12. But it occurred 200 years prior to Tobit himself, so we have another example of an anachronism here. So Jeroboam, king of Israel, had made it in Dan at the festivals. I was the only one to make the frequent journey to Jerusalem, prescribed for all Israel as an eternal commandment. I used to hurry off to Jerusalem with the first fruits of crops and herds, tithes of the cattle, the first shearings of the sheep. I gave them to the priests of Aaron's line for the altar, the tithe of wine, corn, olive oil, pomegranates, and other fruits to the Levites ministering in Jerusalem. The second tithe for the 6 years I converted into money, and I went and distributed in Jerusalem year by year among the orphans and widows and the converts who had attached themselves to Israel. Every third year, when I was brought in and gave it to them, we held a feast according to the rule laid down in the law of Moses and the instructions given by Deborah, the mother of Hananiah, our grandfather. For my father had died, leaving me an orphan. So Tobit is very keen to say what a good, faithful Jewish man that he was. When I came of age, I took a wife from our kindred and had a son with her, whom I called Tobias. Now he's going to play an important role in the story. After the deportation to Syria, when I was captive and came to Nineveh, every one of my kindred and nation ate Gentile food, but I myself scrupulously avoided doing so. You might compare with the story of Daniel. Since I was wholeheartedly mindful of my God, the Most High endowed me with a presence which won me the favour of Shalmaneser, and I became his buyer of supplies. As long as he lived, I used to travel to Media and buy for him there. I deposited bags of money to the value of 10 talents of silver with my kinsman Gabael, son of Gabri, in Media. Now that's an important point for the story that's coming up. He's left there 10 talents of silver behind with one of his relatives. When Shalmaneser died and was succeeded by his son Sennacherib, the roads to Media passed out of Assyrian control, and I could no longer make the journey. Well, again, there's some historical problems here. The Sargon II, not Sennacherib, succeeded Shalmaneser V. There is a tradition in 2 Kings 17:6 which chimes in with the tradition in Tobit, and probably Tobit is basing what he's saying here on this incorrect statement in 2 Kings. In the time of Shalmaneser, I did many acts of charity for my fellow countrymen. I shared my food with the hungry and provided clothes for the naked. If I saw the dead body of any man of my race lying outside the wall of Nineveh, I buried it. That also is an important little part of the story. I buried all those who fell victim to Sennacherib after his flight from Judea. when the king of heaven executed judgment on him for all his blasphemies, and in his rage he killed many of the Israelites. Well, there is a story that Sennacherib made a failed attempt on Jerusalem in 701, and many of his men died from the plague. I stole their bodies away and buried them, and Sennacherib looked for them but could not find them. One of the Ninevites informed the king that I was giving burial to his victims, so I went into hiding. When I learnt that the king knew about me and that I was wanted for execution, I took fright and ran away. All my property was seized and put into the royal treasury. I was left with nothing but Anna my wife and my son Tobias. However, less than 40 days afterwards, the king was murdered by his 2 sons. They took refuge in the mountains of Ararat, and his son Esarhaddon succeeded him. He appointed Ahikar, now this is an important person, Ahikar, son of my brother Anael, to supervise all the finances of his kingdom. He had control of the entire administration. Then Ahikar interceded on my behalf, and I came back to Nineveh, for he had been chief cupbearer, keeper of the privy seal, comptroller and treasurer when Sennacherib was king of Assyria, and Esarhaddon renewed the appointments. Ahikar was my nephew, and so one of my kinsmen. Now this Ahikar is the subject, in fact, of a much older Assyrian story, where he's portrayed as a kind of ideal administrator and wise man. He is the subject of the story of the wisdom of Ahikar from 5th century Elephantine account in Aramaic, itself based on older Near Eastern material. Here, Ahikar is portrayed as a Jew, and he also, by the way, appears in the 1001 Nights Tale. Well, that's chapter 1, and I'm going to move on now and actually start to have a look at the Greek of the Septuagint for chapter 2, and which starts up here. So, and we're going to read in the Greek from chapter 2 onwards to the end. Kai epi sakedonos basileos katelthen est ton oikon mu. Now this sakedonos is the Esarhaddon I mentioned before. He was the youngest son of Sennacherib, and he reigned from about 681 to 669 BC. Now we get epi plus the genitive here, which is good classical usage in the time of, especially used with kings. So in the time of Esarhaddon, I went down to my house, and Hegune mu Anna kai Tobias hofios mu, and Anna and Tobias my son. We get a singular verb here because it's just agreeing with Gune, and then we get a separate subject here, which happens in classical Greek but also in Hebrew. So apolethe, something like was given back, was restored, because remember he had been in trouble with the king. So when he went back to his house, and his wife Anna and his son were restored. And in literally the 50th of our feasts, so it's the 50th, we have to supply hammer here or something, on the 50th day of our feast. This is the, which is the Hagia, the sacred feast, understood hebdomadon, of weeks. Literally of lots of 7 days, and hence of weeks. This became the Feast of Pentecost in later Maccabean times. The festive day occurred 50 days after Passover. So 50 being 7 lots of 7 plus 1. And hence we get the Pentecost day. We get their word Pentecost. So you could say at the Feast of Pentecost, or at the 50-day feast after 50 days, which is the sacred Feast of Weeks. Egenethe, it happened, moi, for me, there was for me, Ariston kalon. Ariston here is breakfast. So there was a kalon, a fine breakfast. Kai anepesa to aristesai. This is from anapipto. Weak aorist, you normally get anapeson. It would be anepeson, it would be in good classical, but this verb you do see the weak aorists as well. So anapipto is to recline. This again may be an anachronism here, since it was the Persians, not the Assyrians, who generally reclined to eat. But so I reclined, and then to plus the infinitive of purpose, so as to have my breakfast. Kai paratethe, aorist passive from paratithemi, her trapezda, the table was laid for me. No mention of Anna, who does all the work, and opsaria plyona. Now, opsaria is a word often translated delicacies. It means anything food which is cooked, any cooked food, and more delicacies, paratethe, were laid for me. Neuter plural singular verb, which is quite correct Greek. Kai epa, weak aorist again, and I said to Tobias my son, Paidion, my boy, Badidzi, go, kai hon an hures ptokon tona delphon hemon, ek nina werton isk maloton. Now we get here this quite common in Greek generally, this hyperbaton. So go and literally a poor man of our brethren from the captives of Nineveh, whomever you find. So he's saying whoever you find who is a poor man among our brethren from the captives in Nineveh, hos memnetai en holocardia. This is that Hebraic use of en. Hebrew has one of those inseparable prepositions b, which is always translated by n in Greek, but b has a range of meanings and so often can mean with. And we have to understand here to theou. Out of respect, the name of God is often left out. We'll see this several times in Tobit and elsewhere in the Septuagint. The name of God is not mentioned out of respect. So it's whoever has calls to mind God, so has God in his mind, with, there's that funny use of n, with his whole heart, and bring him, and Hebrew has lots of ands, and so does we get that in the Septuagint here, and bring him, and phagetai, future from estheo, he will eat commonly with me, so he will eat in common with me. Kai idi pros menose, and behold, I will wait for you. This is the future. You can see by the accent it's from pros meno, but original pros men eso, and then contracts to pros meno. So you see it's a future by the accent. And I will wait for you, my son, mekri tu plus infinitive, until you come. Kai eparuthe Tobias Zetesai tinaptokon tornadelphon hemon. And Tobias went to seek a certain poor man among our brethren. And having returned, he said, Pater, O father. And I said to him, Behold, here am I, my son. And having answered, he said, Father, behold, haes ek tu ethnus hemon, one from among our race, pephonutai, this is from phonuo, this is the perfect passive, has been murdered, from phonuo, has been murdered. Kai eriptai, again the perfect passive from ripto, literally has been hurled in the marketplace. We would probably say into. but N and ace by this stage of Greek are merging, as often you see in the New Testament, has been hurled in the marketplace, we might say into the marketplace, kai autothi nun estrangulatai, and there now he has been strung up. Probably, the word literally means to strangle. We get our word strangle from it, obviously. But probably he is strung up. Often people who upset the rulers were hung, and then their bodies were strung up on the wall as a warning to others not to imitate them. Kai anapadesas, and having leapt up, Epheka from Aphiami, I left behind my breakfast, prin a. This is a, you just get prin normally in classical Greek, but this is an Ionic idiom which you will see commonly in Homer and Herodotus. Prin a plus infinitive. This is from guamai, to taste. Before me to have tasted it, guamai takes a genitive, partitive genitive. Kai an irumai, future, and I will take him up from the platea, from the square. Kai es hen ton oikidion. And now we get a change of tense here, and literally I placed him in one of the oikidion. These are the little houses, perhaps little storehouses. Mekri tu ton helion, until, so mekri tu plus infinitive again, until the sun set. Now again we get this connective kai and thapso. Probably in context here given now the verbs as a future, but it could be a subjunctive, or it could be a future from thapto. It's literally take a future and I will bury him. So this is slightly idiomatic here. This probably may well be a subjunctive, and the kai here is instead of hina, in order that I might bury him. So I placed him in this one of these little outhouses until the sun set, in order that I might bury him. But the Greek has kai, not hina. Epistrepsas, having returned therefore, elusamein, I bathed myself. Which you have to do after handling the dead. And I was eating ton arton, the bread, metapenthus, with grief. Kai emnes then to rematos to prophetu, and I remembered the word of the prophet, as many things as Amos said, speaking in Bethel. This is Bethel in Greek, it's Bethel. This is a quotation now we get from Amos 8:10. Strapheson tai humon hai hiotai es penthos kai pasai hai oide humon es threnos. And your feasts will be turned, or will be twisted almost, will be turned from strepho into grief, and all your songs, your oidai, perhaps almost psalms or songs, into threnos, into threnody, into lamentation. These are songs of sadness. Kai eklausa, and I wept, from Clio. Kai hoti edu hohelios, and when the sun set, I went, kai aruxas, from aruso, and I dug, literally I dug a hole, ethapsa, and I buried him. So having dug a hole, I buried him. This is from thapto. And those who were near kat egelon, this is from katagelao, so this is a contract alpha verb, they were laughing at me. Gelao is to laugh, katagelao is to laugh against somebody, so to mock. So those who were near me were mocking me, saying, U fobertai uketi. So he's no longer frightened. You remember that in the chapter 1 he got into trouble for doing this, for burying the dead, and so they're mocking him and saying, well, he hasn't really learnt his lesson. He's He's still doing the same thing again. Eidega epitsethethe tu phonosthenai peri tu phragmatos tu kai apedra. Kai palin idu thaptai tus nekus. For now, epitsete, this is a funny word here. It's often used of criminals to be sought after. So, for he was a bit like our hunted down. So he was sought after. He was under suspicion of. They were out to get him for. So 2 plus passive infinitive here. So he was sought after, so as to be murdered, to be put to death, peri tu pragmatus tutu, on account of or regarding this very matter. This perhaps almost practice here might capture that with the pragma. Because of this practice, kai epedra, and he ran away, and again, behold, he buries the dead. Kai haute te nukti, and on that night, elus samen, I washed myself. Kai eselthon esten aulenmu, and I went into my courtyard, kai ekoimethen, and I slept paraton toikon, beside the wall of the courtyard. You get 2 words for wall. You get toikos is more common in Ionic. You get that in Homer as well. Takos is normally the Attic word here. So, but it's beside the wall of the courtyard. Kai toprosepon mu, and my face was understood. Anakalumenon, was uncovered. Dia tokauma, on account of the heat. Now, trigger warning here. There's some very nasty thing is about to happen to him. So you might know whether you want to hear that, but I just warn you in advance. Kai uk edein hotis struthia en totoiko epano mu esin. And I did not know, this is the past tense of oida, that struthia, sparrows, are on the wall, epano mu, above me. Kai ekathisen to ephodiuma auton estus ophthalmus muthermon, kai epegigen leukomata. So the ophoduma is the dung or the droppings from the birds. So their droppings, ekathisen, literally sat in my eyes, and it was thermon, it was warm. And epag again, and it produced, from epago, it produced leukomata. Well, what can you say about this? White spots, I suppose. The word in Galen, the term is used, is a defect of the eye, thickening of the cornea there, but not cataracts, which is probably what was intended here. Couple of things. Birds were often seen as, in the ancient world, as being controlled by Satan and by demons. So these struthia are bringers of bad things. You might like to compare with the parable of the sower, where it's the birds that come and take the seed away, and they're meant to be symbolic of Satan. And the second thing is that blindness was often seen as a sign of divine punishment. So you might like to compare Tiresias in Greek tragedy and also in John 9:2. And so they produced these white spots, whatever they are. Kai eporomen prostus iatrus, and I went to the doctors, therapeutheni, to be healed, aorist passive. And now we get this hosoi and tossutoi. And by as much as they anointed me in respect of their drugs, by so much more my eyes were blinded with the white spots, or by the white spots, mekri tu apotophtheni, until I went completely blind. Now I'll just point out here this very interesting, this is known as an Alexandrian aorist. The verb is enkreo. Kreo is to anoint. This is enkreo, so it's just to apply ointment. and the root is Cree, and the osan is this funny aorist, so-called Alexandrian aorist ending, which is very common in the Septuagint. So this seems to have become one of the aorist endings of the language spoken in Alexandria, and you'll see this ending very commonly in the Septuagint, sometimes called an Alexandrian aorist. Kai amen, that's a late form of the first person singular from the past tense of the verb to be. So the a or ain in classical Greek becomes amen, and this is the usual form that continues on into the New Testament. I was adunatos tois ophthalmos, literally I was without power in my eyes. Perhaps you have to supply idain, I was unable to see with my eyes. The Vulgate has in utilis meus oculis. So I was unable to see with my eyes for 4 years, and all my brothers elupunto were upset, were sad regarding me. And here's this this is the akikar again. It is called akikaros here. So akikar nourished me, so looked after me, probably in the sense of gave them money to live off, because his wife and son would have fed him presumably, but looked after him in a very general sense for 2 years, before pro 2 plus infinitive from badizdo, and the subject's in the accusative here, so before he went into Eleumaeus. Now Eleumaeus, this is the Elam, it's northeast of the Persian Gulf in modern Iran. It gets mentioned in Acts 2:9, you will recall. Verse 11, Kai ter chrono akeno, and in that time Anna my wife, and we get this very rare verb here. This is from erytheuomai. It's to work for a wage as a spinner. The word erythos is a spinner or weaver. So she was doing basically weaving and sewing in the womanly works, in female works. So she's bringing the money in because he can't work because of his eyesight, and she's the one who's bringing in the money. It's a little bit obscure here. Kai apestele tois kurios auton, and she sent off. This must mean, understand, the things she was making to their masters. So she used to send off the work to its masters, and they gave in return to her ton misthon, the reward, so pay. And in the 7th of Dustros, now Dustros is the 5th month of the Macedonian calendar. It's about February, March. This is another anachronism here. Seleucus Nicator in 312 to 251, he introduced the Macedonian calendar to his realm. So this occurs a bit later, so this is a bit of another anachronism. So in the 7th month of Dustros, ex eteme ton iston, literally she cut the iston, the web, that's the thing she's weaving, and she sent it to the masters. And they gave to her all her pay, ton misthon panta kai, and they gave to her an eryphos, a kid, from among the goats, hestia, literally for the hearth, presumably to kill and eat. The Vulgate here has ad mandicandum, so for the eating. But when she came inside, or perhaps it came into me, because the subject here is the erophos. So when it came to me, the kid began krasdane to make a noise, to cry out, and I called her and I said, "From whence is this kid?" "Me poti glepsimaion estin." Klepsimaion, lovely word, it's quite rare and probably a neologism. You can see the klept root here of stealing, so a klepsimaion is a klepsimaios is something which is stolen. So is this kid stolen? Apodos auto tois kurios autos. Give it back to its masters. So he thinks that she's nicked it. Uga exousion. For we do not have the authority, an emphatic we do not have authority, phagain, to eat, literally nothing stolen, anything which is stolen. And she said to me, dose dedotai, as a gift it was given to me, epi in addition to, with epi plus the dative, in addition to my pay. And I did not believe her, and I told her to give it back to the masters. Kai pros eruthrion. This is a funny verb, again, very rare. It's from pros eruthriao. It's an alpha contract verb. You'll know that eruthros root means red. So it means to flush with anger, to redden up. So I flushed with anger on account of this to her. So it would seem that Tobit and his wife are not getting on terribly well. So he accuses her of having stolen it and orders it to go back, and he says, I got very angry to her. Eta, and then apokrithesa, this is an aorist participle here from apokrinomai, and it's feminine participle. So she, having answered, she says to me, we get lots of historic presence here as well, she says to me, kai pu asin hai eliamosunaisu, and where now are all your acts of almsgiving, and where are your righteousnesses, where are all your acts of righteousness? Ide, and this is very hard to translate and very obscure, it's ide tauta metasu gnosta estin. Literally, behold, these things are known among you, or with you. Hard to translate here. Perhaps it means something like, now we see what you really are, in the sense of, despite of all of your acts of mercy and all of your almsgiving and all of your righteous deeds, you really are just a suspicious old bugger. And of course, Tobit's embarrassed that his wife is bringing the money in and not him, so he gets quite cranky with her. This is quite a homely little section, I think, one of the little endearing parts of the story. So that's the first two chapters, and we'll continue that in another recording.